So thank you everyone for joining us on the fourth and final day of the Atlantic Virtual Coach Conference for celebrating National Coaches Week. My name's Kirsty. I'm the Community Coaching Lead at Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic. And this conference wouldn't be possible without our partners, so Coach New Brunswick, Coaching Newfoundland, Coach NS, Coaching PEI, and all our Sport Nova Scotia. So the Government of Nova Scotia, Sport Nova Scotia, Nova Scotian Gaming, Support for Sport. Before I introduce our first presenter, I just wanted to say on behalf of Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic that we would like to acknowledge that our office and where I'm currently residing is in the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And we are aware that there's people joining us from all over the country, so we welcome you to share where you currently reside, and you can do that in the chat box. So here's our lineup for tonight. And first I'm going to introduce Len. So Len Harvey is the Acadia Axewomen head coach and entering his sixth season at the helm of the Axewomen program. He helps to guide the team to two consecutive AUS championships in 2018 and 2019, two U Sports National Championships appearances, and a U Sports National #1 ranking in 2018. The Axewomen have made the playoffs each of his 4 seasons, including reaching 4 consecutive AUS finals. Len was named the Carolyn Savoy Memorial Award winner in 2018 as the AUS Coach of the Year. Harvey has accumulated 74 wins and 26 regular season losses over his 5 seasons with the Axewomen. During his time as a coach, the Axewomen program has produced 3 U Sports Major Award winners, 5 U Sports All-Canadians, 7 AUS Major Award winners, 11 AUS All-Stars, and 42 Academic All-Canadians. So the topic that Len will be talking to us tonight is about intangibles for performance, getting quotes off the walls and into action. And this topic came about from some suggestions from coaches. They really want to learn more about team culture and team dynamics and how to promote that in their programs. So we're really excited to have Len talk to us about this topic. So Len, I'll stop sharing and you should be able to share from here.
You got that?
Yep.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Just first, I'm going to be boogieing along here because I want to keep us on time. And I know that we're tight. So just want to quickly say thanks to Kirsty. You've done so much work with this stuff, Kirsty, all spring and summer through the pandemic. And there's been a lot of opportunities for coach education through a difficult time. So just a big thanks to you specifically for all your hard work. My presentation is about intangibles for performance, and the reason I chose this topic is because I think it's a bit of a fake hustle area of leadership. I think too many people put things in handbooks, on their walls, and their social media that aren't really accurate representations of what's going on in the day-to-day of their team or their organization. We're also cutting and pasting organizational values straight out of other people's things and expecting them to work for our organization, which is, to be honest, it's counter to the whole process. It's counter to the whole intent of it. So core in Latin is literally heart. So when considering your core values, you have to consider what's in your heart as a coach. You have to consider what's in your organization's heart. With my team, I'm trying to bring whatever is written on the walls and write it on their hearts. That's my goal as a teacher. It was when I was in the classroom as well. I think we're in a real crisis in 2020, and that's without a worldwide pandemic to deal with. I think we have a real struggle with image versus identity right now. We have a powerful responsibility as teachers and leaders of young people to help them figure out how to cultivate an identity that they're proud of instead of an image that they want to project. This includes teams. As a leader, you need to focus far more on the substance and identity of your team than on the image you want to project for your team or you as a coach. Again, we have a lot of people in 2020 that are a mile wide and an inch deep. So starting through this, one of the things that I think we have to consider is where do we spend most of our time in the leadership pyramid? So the top piece of the leadership pyramid is your tactical knowledge. And it's the smallest piece. So do I know the strengths and weaknesses of my team, their team? Can I adjust those to win? The second piece of the pyramid and the second smallest piece is your technical knowledge. So do I know the skills of my sport? Can I teach them Do my athletes respond to my teaching? The third one is where it starts to get really important, in my opinion, and this is where a lot of these conversations tonight will focus, is your intrapersonal knowledge. So do I know myself? Am I authentic? Do I invest in myself? Do I know my strengths? Do I know my weaknesses? And then the fourth and final one, that's the largest one, is your interpersonal knowledge. So do I know other people? Can I relate to them? Do I have empathy? Is basically your social emotional ability. So it's I guess when we want to get a true idea of the intangibles for success, we need to define them and make them clear. I think that there's, the top of this comes down to skills and tactics. So your player development, your on-court skills, or, your game tactics, whatever those happen to be for your specific sport. But the stuff under the iceberg, that's kind of, lying below the water is the bigger piece of this, and the true intangibles for success, in my opinion. So for us, that comes back to toughness. So their physical dependability, their mental dependability, their performance consistency, their desire, which is like their competitive spirit, their school or their team means something to them. They have uncommon effort. They have a growth mindset. And then sorry about that, guys. I'm not clicking through this properly. And then the final piece is alignment. So are they responsible? Are they disciplined? Do they have mature behavior? Do they believe in the team and the coaches? And that's a big one. And it's not always perfect, and we don't get it perfect all the time. We've struggled with that. To be honest, we've struggled with that recently. And it's nobody's perfect. I think the biggest thing is, again, what I'm going to keep coming back to with all of this is you understanding what your values are as a coach, so that you can course correct as you kind of see fit. So we typically will recruit them to our teams or try and get them on our teams for the top of the iceberg, but their athletic skills will never rise higher than their behavior skills, which are the 3 skills below the waterline. The skills and tactics, I think, get covered a lot, but we say we look for those other qualities, the toughness, the desire, the alignment, but we'll often prioritize that top of the iceberg over these other qualities. If they're truly non-negotiable for you, then that means that strength in one area will not compensate for weakness in another area. To me, that's what non-negotiable means. So strength in one area will not compensate for weakness in another area. I think it's important for you to spend some time thinking about what the non-negotiables of your team are. People use that term all the time, but in reality, most of the time what they're talking about is really fluid. It's not actually non-negotiable. So usually when things become negotiable in the areas of the iceberg below the water here is when there's a lot of the iceberg showing above the water. So when the talent of a player or a person is impossible to miss. I always love watching coaches how negotiable everyone's non-negotiables get when it's a super talented player that they're dealing with. So I've, through this pandemic, I've kind of enjoyed watching all these the flip or flop shows and these home renovation shows too much. But every time I watch them, I always think about how it relates to priorities and prioritizing. So it's every time people start any of these projects on television, they begin with this huge picture of what their house is going to look like. But then as it goes along, they start spending way too much money on all of the things inside of the house. So they end up putting in a massive kitchen, or they have some fancy toilet and all those different things. But they tend to, at the end of it, it's kind of like they neglect their landscaping. So they go from having the initial plans with this nice pool and beautiful trees and this manicured lawn to like hopefully throwing some sod down on the ground and maybe sweeping the front walkway off. So your team is kind of similar to this, and you guys don't have an unlimited budget. Neither do any of us. Your time, your resources, everything is finite. So as you add pieces to your project, you always have to realize that you're taking something away. I'm not the person to say whether your decision is right or wrong. So if you think that the sweatsuit that the team needs is paramount to what they need right now, then that's your deal. Like that's absolutely important. I can say that was one of the things for me in my first year at Acadia that was one thing that needed to change was their equipment. And that was something that I had to prioritize, but it meant that I took away from another area. So ultimately what often gets shortchanged in these types of, financial negotiations or even time negotiations are the intangibles. So the pieces we talk about being so important to our culture, we often will kind of leave to the last and not think too much about them. So I'm a big Josh Medcalf disciple, and in 5 years here at Acadia, I can honestly tell you we haven't spoken about goals once. I don't believe in setting goals. I don't believe in that. I'm sure many of you do, and that's more power to you. What we're totally focused on is our daily process. I'm very organized and kind of A-type, so I think most coaches are. I was always someone who was really, really focused on the next thing though. So I had a really hard time being present because I was always trying to prepare. After reading The Cubs Way a couple of years ago and learning more about Joe Madden, who was their manager, and then kind of reflecting on the leaders whom I've admired through the years, I really believe in the statement, be present, not perfect. So for me, I needed to stop being so focused on the destination or the results and start actually enjoying the journey and the process, which I found out to be more impactful for performance and all of my relationships anyway. So an image to remember this in terms of performance and to keep us in check is to think of this question. If you want your car to go faster, do you stare at the speedometer? And of course, like we wouldn't do that. We know that we've got to get under the hood of the car and focus on the engine if we want to go faster. So you need to be able to focus on the things that actually drive performance. So for us, that comes down to belief, which drives behaviors, which drives performance. An important thing to remember about this as well, now that I'm, kind of saying this to you, is keep in mind that the performance of a car is a really good analogy for this. Is you don't add more things to an F1 race car to make it go faster. They're always looking for ways to make it lighter and how to remove things from the car to make it even faster. I think this holds true when thinking of the performance of your team as well. So don't overload them with so much that they can't actually perform anymore. So how to sell it? So how do you get your team to value these important intangibles? It's easy to entice them to try and learn a new move or, shoot the ball or do something fun and maybe exciting a little bit more. But as I said, this stuff is harder to capture and harder to assign a value to. So Fergus Connolly actually talked about we're broccoli salespeople. So I really like that term. Is that essentially we're trying to sell a product that isn't that catchy, and it's going to provide us with little immediate satisfaction and costs about the same as something that's far more attractive. So we need to stop taking so much time to try and hook them in. We need to start to adjust to the attention span of this generation. You need to grab them in 15 seconds. You need to appeal to their emotion versus their logic. I can watch an hour-long documentary about how McDonald's is going to kill me and then see a 15-second clip of a Big Mac and fries, and I'm going to be at the drive-through for a cheeseburger. So we have to figure out how to catch their attention about these things. To me, storytelling is sometimes just as powerful as showing video. All you need to do is to be able to create a picture in their mind or imagination, and that's all the visual they need. So you always have to remember is we don't coach them to play, we coach them to learn how to play. That's the difference between coaching human beings and human doings, in my opinion. So Paul was on last night, and I don't think he touched on this, Kirsty. So I'm diving into an area that's not. I'm stepping out of my sport. But I grew up on the water, and one of my favorite things to do is race sailboats. And I'd argue actually that there isn't a better example of teamwork than to watch the crew of a performance sailboat go to race. But I won't get into that. Paul would be excited about that, but not everybody. So with all of this, we're ultimately trying to evaluate something that's the same as catching the wind on a boat. There are lots of tools to measure how fast the wind is blowing, which direction it's coming from, how it's bouncing off the shore, but those won't help us necessarily make our boat go faster. They're just information. So for us, we're trying to make the boat catch the wind the right way and feel good. And we're really going to struggle to measure it. So like I said before, staring at the speedometer is not going to help us. So one of the things, you'll see the arrows here, they're called telltales. And so for your program, I think telltales are something that you learn about early on as a sailor. They're small little pieces of fabric that you attach to the sail. And they don't give you a measurement of anything. They're not kicking over to an iPhone to give you a reading of it. But what they do is they tell you how the wind is flowing over your sails just by how you see them. So you have to use your eyes, and you've got to keep an eye on them and see how they're actually flowing over the sails. They give live feedback about whether you should turn the boat upwind, downwind, trim your sails in, let them out, and lots of other, tuning terms that excite me but bore you, but you guys get the idea. The other interesting thing about them, which makes it a pretty good analogy, I think, is that they're pretty useless when it's calm with no wind. So telltales don't do much for you then, but they're particularly effective at helping you to trim your sails for performance in more challenging situations. So for us, we needed to build in telltales, and I think you should too, into your program so that you can know when to adjust your sails. The biggest thing ultimately, and if you've read anything from Google recently, is that psychological safety is the umbrella over everything. So after Google survey and their big analysis of performance and high performance, this has become much more present in the minds of people looking to address performance within their own organization. It's the number one quality to unlock performance. Without it, you will never get to where you're hoping. The funny thing is that every leader and every coach thinks they have it. I'm here to tell you, though, you can have an open door policy all you want. If no one ever knocks on the door, they don't feel safe with you. One of my telltales through the years has been how often players will come in to talk when I haven't requested the meeting. I'm also very cognizant of how often I'm the one who has to break the conversational ice, particularly with younger people. I think one of the best ways to make someone feel good in an organization is to notice how they behave. It doesn't always have to be publicly. Sometimes it's just as powerful to catch someone in the hall or send them a text message or something and just notice something about them that they did. Then if you want to make them feel valued in the organization, you give them a skill. So those moments are easy to catch, and there's nothing more impactful than a statement that layers a skill with a behavior. So if you say something like, Sally did a great job of reading the slips on that screen today, but that's not surprising considering all of the work she's been doing, looking at video and coming in to ask questions. So noticing things this way helps people feel more safe. It gives them license to do more. It gives them license to say more. But when layering skills with behaviors, don't make them compliments with strings attached. So all I mean by that is don't say things like, great shooting, Susie. We need you to do that for us to win. That's layering a skill with an outcome. And it's more likely to tighten them up or make them feel like they're a commodity, not a person. Red Bull have become masters at this stuff. They're trying to unlock human performance. They've kind of gone from this energy drink sponsor of, extreme sports athletes to literally putting Felix Baumgartner into a supersonic free fall to Earth from the outer edges of space, all in the name of advancing what's possible for humans. The cool thing about what they do is they put a lot of work into high perceived risk, but low actual risk scenarios with their athletes. So Felix may be able to jump from space, but he could be scared to public speak. So obviously one is far more risky than the other, but to establish a psychologically safe environment, I think you have to work around those edges with your athletes to find activities that are high perceived risk for them and help them navigate through them to find some success inside of it. So team building activities are great for this, but my challenge to you is to not just autopilot team building activities or Google team building activities. Put as much time and thought into planning those activities as you would the scouting report or something for a championship game. So ultimately you want them to feel that fear, realize that the environment they're in is safe, and then you can coach them up inside of that environment. So we come back to courage. I'm a former English teacher, so I do believe strongly in the power of language. And so we never ever talk about tough or difficult conversations. We talk about having courageous conversations, because the conversations we view as tough or difficult actually just require courage. And I don't want to focus on the negative aspects of things. So focusing on the behaviors and virtues you want to have and putting that into your language is extraordinarily powerful. And this is where things fall off the rails most of the time, because people are unwilling or don't have enough courage to have these conversations that need to be had. It's been really impressed upon me by one of my mentors that great coaching is in the moments. And these are typically the moments where coaches flinch. We'll request courageous conversations from our athletes often, but we often will not be the ones that will have them ourselves. So one big area that this comes into play for everyone is dealing with you can fill in the blank of just the talented, you know what. You better have the courage to navigate those conversations, or they're going to run and ruin your team. There's nothing more discouraging to a great teammate than watching you tolerate a bad one. So regardless of their skill level, we wanted to create a culture of communication here. So because I know that it's something that I value myself as an employee a lot, and I get really negative when there's a void in communication. I think generally as humans, we do that anyway. When there's a void in communication, we assume the negative, not the positive. So, Johnny walks by me in the hallway and doesn't say hello. I assume that Johnny has something, like there's a problem with me, not Johnny is having a bad day or something. It's the way our kind of brains are wired to think. Something I heard a while ago was the idea of truth over harmony. But as I progressed and watched people, I saw that often that theory was what seemed to embolden or give license to coaches or leaders to treat people like dirt in the name of truth. And it often created a less harmonious environment. So again, I think this is another great coaching is in the moments area. So it's important to tell people the truth while treating them with dignity. And this can create more harmony because people know where they stand. And this is going to force you to work on your ability to critique them without being a critic. So critics tend to get personal and keep hammering at messages that have already been delivered. And critiquing someone focuses on the performance, not the person, and it's collaborative. We've gotten a lot of runway out of a couple rules of thumb with this, but the biggest one is the Chuck Dalyism is don't leave scars on your players. Obviously it's metaphorical, but don't leave them with statements or moments from you as a coach that leave them with a negative scar that they can't get rid of. I think that it would shock you, to be honest, especially if there's some youth coaches on here. Our age would be 18 to 23. I bet you it would shock you in some of the conversations that I've had with athletes at our level, where the most defining negative barrier to their mental performance has come from an interaction that they've had with a coach or one of their parents at a crucial time in their development. Maybe it was even as grade 6, grade 7. Like it would surprise you how long that those scars can last. So some questions, I guess, to ask them. And I think this is helpful. So you can ask your athletes to kind of better understand them early on, because again, the interpersonal stuff is one of the most important pieces to establishing really great, really seeing those intangibles for performance and, performance take off is what motivates you, what frustrates you, how do you hope to develop, and do you have any barriers to that currently? Then what gets you excited to get out of bed? I think that they're great conversation starters with your athletes when it's one-on-one. If you don't even feel comfortable doing that, get used to using Google Forms and build that stuff in. I know your athletes will probably appreciate that as well, because they can actually kind of move their way through that a little bit more on their own time. Ikigai was something that was, it kind of goes back to the why you get up in the morning, but asking those questions can help us discover more about our athletes' Ikigai. So one of my mentors, Mark Smith, who a lot of you know is a softball coach. He spent a lot of time in Japan while competing, and they've really taken this on with their senior women's softball athletes. And recently we were speaking with one of his captains, and she really hammered home how important this was for her self-discovery as an athlete, which obviously makes it both important for us to know about ourselves as coaches, which is a big piece, as well as to work to understand this about our athletes. So for most of us, we're just a stop along the journey for them, along their self-discovery of their Ikigai. But we have to help show them what they're good at, what the world needs, and give them an outlet for their passions. So I got this one from Tim Kite years ago, but the questions that everyone asks in an organization are: where are we now? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? What do you want me to do? And how am I doing? I think you need to answer these questions for everyone on your team, including your staff. And you need to spend a lot of time, especially now in 2020, on the last one. So this isn't about false praise or false encouragement, because that's where you lose the high performers. But you need to be giving them feedback in these areas almost daily. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm not clicking this. So, and I know I'm boogieing along here, but I also know that this is going to be recorded and you guys have a chance to get through some questions. So I don't want to waste too much time on you. The pit of despair is one that I think it was introduced me to a number of years ago, and I've used it in so many different areas through the years. I think it provides a lot of value and clarity around helping people through the process of building the intangibles that make you successful. So we spend very little time affecting change in this area, and we often don't help our athletes make their way through that cycle either. So the story I've always loved is actually from the West Wing. And one of the stories is, so this guy is walking down the street when he falls in a hole, and the walls are so steep he can't get out. And so a doctor passes by, and the guy shouts up, "Hey, you, can you help me out?" And the doctor writes him a prescription, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. Then a priest comes along, and the guy shouts up, "Father, I'm down in this hole. Can you help me out?" And the priest writes out a prayer, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. And then a friend walks by and says, "Hey, Joe, it's me. Can you help me out?" And the friend jumps down in the hole. And our guy says, "Are you stupid? Now we're both down here." But the friend says, "Yeah, but I've been down here before, and I know the way out." I think that we can spend time as coaches getting into the pit with our athletes and helping them out. So the improvement cycle, essentially, part of the pit of despair is they move through this cycle of, I'm the best, I feel great. Then they start to question themselves. Then they're thinking, no, I'm not very good. Then they get into the pit of despair where you're talking about like quitting or, getting into, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't fun. Then they start to trend back up towards, I feel better, but I'm still terrible. Can we stop yet? And then like, holy crap, like I'm getting better. And then they're past where they started. And then they're thinking, what's next? And they actually restart this cycle again. The part that I think that we can do better at is adding a bridge of hope across so that they don't actually get into the pit of despair. And this is the part where you can jump down into the hole with them. I think that if you're willing to have the courageous conversations and you get down with them, you'll help them cross over before they get into the pit of despair. So helping them across that area, I think it can really help us with our athletes' mental health. I think that their perception of themselves, as well as to get them to the next stage of performance even quicker than before. So this is, we say we're players first, but are we really? So this is huge. After we give our athletes psychological safety and we empower them to speak to us, we need to listen to them. So Kevin Eastman said it best, that we need big eyes and big ears to see behaviors and listen to what people are telling us. I think the players are absolutely the best source of information and one of the best telltales for your program. It can be minor things or major things. And for me personally, that can dip into the technical, tactical as well. You have to develop these relationships with your players, and you have to seek the feedback out. So how do you do it? This is the tough part. And, maybe I should spend a lot of time on this, but to be honest, it's just to provoke your own thinking and come up with your own ways of doing stuff. I think some different ways that we've done it, because it's not a perfect science, but we've used a daily practice survey that they fill out at the very end of practice every single day. It's tactile. They don't do it on their phones. I know that there's such an ease. Everything has to be easy and on their phones, but I also think there's a mindlessness that's becoming attached to everything being on their phones. When it's tactile with a pen and a piece of paper, they have to think about it, and they have to actually consider what they're, circling, because it's permanent. It's not even pencil anymore. There's no delete button. It's a pen. And I think that's important. So we ask them to consider some things, and it helps me because I get to look at it and see how they process the practice. I get to see how they felt about the practice. I get to see how their knowledge is going in the practice. And it always finishes with a question, because I'm a male coaching females, and my wife tells me I don't know anything, which is probably true. But the final question is, do you need to connect? And I think that's important. It's a simple yes, no, but there's times where, in my first few years coaching, where I'd go through time periods where a player would go a whole year with, needing to connect, but not connecting. And I think that's something that has really, really impacted us. Get used to Google Forms. I think that those have been awesome for us. We've used, one of the Google Forms I've used that I love, and I know the players do too, and you can use them more frequently. Don't just do it to do it and check a box. Like, use this stuff weekly, daily, bi-weekly. Don't think of it as something that you use like once a year or something. I think we asked the question, this is from Wade Gilbert, is coach, I need ... Coach, I need you to start. Coach, I need you to stop. Coach, I need you to keep doing what? And they just fill in the blanks. We have pre-briefs and debriefs to our practices, which are incredibly important. So we prepare with the coaches, we prepare with the players. We debrief with the coaches and the players so that there's a finality, there's closure to our practices. There's finality and closure to our games. And I think that stuff's important. It doesn't take hours. It shouldn't take hours. Remember, you're broccoli salespeople, so you only have a few minutes to keep their attention. So you have to be uber prepared and on top of what you're doing with them. But I think that's some of the fun of the challenge is, reducing the time that you have with them, keeping your F1 car light, and you'll really start to figure out what's of value and what's not, because you won't be able to do everything. So hopefully this kind of gets, your mind thinking about some of these things. I think I'm pretty good for time, Kirsty, but I'm not entirely certain on that. But and if anybody, if anybody wants to, if anybody ever wants to connect or just shoot questions, or, I'm an open book. I'd love to come in and talk to a team or talk to a coach or do anything. And I think that's, Kirsty has all my information and it's all on the websites and stuff anyway.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Len. And I'll be following up this conference with an email with some information. I can include your email so people can get in touch with you. Thank you, Len, for talking about this topic. I know we had something similar back during the coach socializations, and I always learn so much from you when you talk about this. So thank you. And I actually started doing the surveys with my athletes when I think we talked about this back in February when Wade was here. And so I started doing that with my athletes, and they really liked it. And it really brought up their intensity. So thank you for that idea. We have received a couple questions. So the first one was, how do you introduce positive attitude in the athletes?
I don't know if you introduce it as much as it's really recognizing when they're, being negative. I think sometimes, if you notice that in people and having the courage to speak to your athletes, and it's, you can do different things. You can attach scores to it. If there's somebody that's increasingly negative all the time in a practice, and, that team loses 5 points off of their team score if this person swears or they kick a ball after you know what I mean? So there's different things like that. But I think it's not as much about catching them being bad, but try and catch them being good. So when you notice that person has a lot of, negative tendencies, or they want to be, they trend a little bit more to the negative side, is when they're positive, man, you're shouting from the rooftops. You're talking about how much that impacted their team, how much that impacted winning. And you layer that skill or that behavior, into a compliment for them. And don't make it, like I said, don't make it a compliment with strings attached. Just make sure that you celebrate that moment with them and for them, and they'll start to figure it out on their own. It's how people respond and react to them.
Great, thank you. And this will be our last question. Sorry, I think a couple more came in, but just reach out to Len with your questions. Like he said, he'll answer. So someone asked, you talked about athletes who have scars from something that may have happened years before. How are you able to recognize these scars and then go about healing them?
I think, again, it's encouragement. The recognition of them it's not easy, but I think, again, it comes back to the interpersonal thing. I think the core of everything that I've talked about is relationships. I may not have said that explicitly, but hopefully everybody sees implicitly that's the core of everything, is that psychological safety piece even comes back to your relationship with your athletes. So if you have that relationship and you get to that point of having psychological safety, then they'll talk to you about it. And they'll bring some of these things up, and you can help them through it. You can talk them through it. Again, it comes back to the moments when you see them doing something that was difficult, maybe for them, that was a little bit more difficult for them as a result of something that had happened to them in the past. And those are the moments where, even the teammates, they may not know about something that happened, but you're yelling from the rooftops and so excited that this player or athlete did something that was really special for them. Again, we have prizes and awards and things that oftentimes the coach will give out. And so, I might give out an award to somebody in practice that maybe it's, the rest of the team might see it as something that, oh, that's a positive. She was pretty good today, but it was actually like a huge moment for her and for us, because she and I knew what she just conquered or what she just went through. And I think those moments, again, it's finding those great moments to celebrate. But it all comes back to relationships. It all comes back to knowing that it all comes back to them feeling safe enough to talk to you about it. So that's the core of it all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Len, and thank you for sharing all of this with us. And it's always great having you on our PD session. So thank you. And thank you everyone for attending. We'll wrap this first session up and then we'll pause the recording to start our next one. So thanks, Len.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kirsty.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining us for the second presenter of day 4 of the National Coaches Week Atlantic Virtual Coach Conference. So our next presenter is Dr. Jeffrey Zahavich. So Jeff is a clinical exercise physiologist and chartered professional coach. He's a kinesiology instructor in the School of Health and Human Performance at Dalhousie University and was the Nova Scotia Provincial Triathlon coach for the 2017 Canada Summer Games in Winnipeg, Manitoba. In more recent years, Jeff has transitioned from coaching high performance sport to coach education as he is an NCCP competition development learning facilitator. So this topic of Mentorship 101 is something that we get suggestions from coaches all the time about. People are always wanting to learn more about mentorship, how to be a mentor, how to be a mentee. So we're really happy to have Jeff on here again to talk about mentorship. So Jeff, you can take it away from here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kirsty. Appreciate it. So tonight's lecture presentation is called Mentorship 101. And super excited to be part of this National Coaches Week and to be presenting this evening. So thank you, Kirsty, for inviting me on. So as mentioned, my name is Dr. Jeff Zahavich. It's actually a new title. My PhD, I actually just completed it. It hasn't even been printed yet, so it's still fresh. A couple of weeks, and that'll be in my hands. So background, again, instructor at Dalhousie. I have my own coaching consulting company that I do a little bit of work with. Still some athletes that keep my foot in the door. And I do a lot of coach education now. That's kind of my main focus now as a coach per se. So I'm a comp dev learning facilitator, specifically with developing athletic abilities, prevention, recovery, and then mentorship, which I'm going to be touching on this evening. So this module that I'm presenting is usually spread out over two evenings. So usually anywhere from 4 to 5 hours per night. So it's usually an 8 to 10 hour presentation. However, this evening, 101, we are shrinking this down to 30 minutes. So it's going to be quick, it's going to be rapid, it's going to be lots of sound bites, and I'll leave a little bit of room at the end for people to have or ask questions or have a little bit of discussion if need be. So the overview of this presentation, we're going to be looking at the mentorship fundamentals. Basically, what does it mean to be a mentor or a mentee? We're going to be looking at the functions and skills that take place during this relationship. And we're going to be going into some examples of mentorship within sports. So these are, for the most part, they're theoretical, hypothetical, but at the same time, they're very applied because they're focused on what could happen with various sport organizations at the provincial level. So let's dive into it. So the fundamental components of mentorship. We're going to start with a quick definition. We'll dive into the rationale. We'll look at the principles of mentorship and the processes involved. So mentorship is a relationship in which a more experienced or knowledgeable person, so the mentor, guides a less experienced or knowledgeable mentee. And the key thing here is that it's not explicitly about a power imbalance. A lot of it comes down to knowledge translation. So the mentor is usually in a position where they either have more experience in a sport-specific role or a specific area of sport or in physiology, depending. And the mentee, again, not to make them lesser of a coach or inexperienced per se, but maybe they're the one that's specifically craving or desiring to learn more about a particular area. So the mentor typically provides both technical instruction and support to the mentee. And the support is a big component, which we'll dive into in a little bit here. So the rationale, again, this is kind of regurgitating what we just said, but the mentor can help less experienced coaches develop their coaching skills, but doing this well requires learning and practicing mentorship skills. So for any of you that are on here as educators, obviously anyone can stand up in front of a crowd and teach, and I use air quotes on that. Teaching is a learned, practiced skill. It doesn't necessarily just come natural. So you really need to practice in your clarity, your teaching style, and your approach to delivering message. And the same goes with mentorship. It really is a skill that you need to continuously work on. So the principles of mentorship, emphasizing the relationship between the more experienced person, the mentor, and the less experienced person, the mentee, is key, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a one-way avenue or one-way street of learning. Because oftentimes the mentee, sure, they're in a position where they're learning from the mentor, but the mentor is actually taking away some valuable learning experience as well. So again, that's where that power imbalance can kind of be disregarded, because at the end of the day, we're both essentially equals and we're both learning from each other. So giving the mentee a significant role in directing the process. To make this an actual learning experience, hands-on, the mentee does need to be in some sort of control over what they're taking and applying. So as long as that relationship is, again, expressed, it's explicit, and what the expectations are, it will end up being a positive relationship between the two. And again, emphasizing the personal development of the mentee. This is not just for the purpose of dictation. It's meant to provide some opportunity for conversation, some advice, and then set them free, let them go practice, make mistakes, learn from it, and then to come back and have a conversation. And then with this mentorship component is also formalizing the process. Because if we just kind of let it go willy-nilly and there's no, I don't want to say rules, but if there's no guidelines in how the relationship is going to unfold, it can just end up being a bit haphazard, and there's less of potentially strong outcomes that could from the relationship. So formalizing it is a key piece. So the process involved, and this again is unique to the learning environment, the situation, the two or more groups or individuals involved, but it can basically come out in the terms of being a mini lecture. So a formal presentation such as what we're doing this evening. It could come out in small group tasks, because maybe there's one mentor and a few mentees, and after the end of the conversation, you then set them free to go and try out different things individually, but also might occur in a small group of situation as well. And similarly with pairs tasks, letting people double it up. It could look at role playing as an opportunity to provide a safe environment for these things to happen, experiential learning opportunities. And then again, individual tasks. So if they are responsible for working with a particular team, give them a task to then go and do, deliver, reflect on it, come back, and then that's where the debrief comes into play. So the debrief plays a huge part of this relationship, because it's an opportunity for the mentee to report back and describe or discuss and explain what worked well and what didn't. And then the next step from there is an opportunity for them to walk away and personally reflect on it. So the personal reflection is often a part that's overlooked, because that tends to be the less formal side of the mentorship. But at the end of the day, the mentee really needs to be able to reflect on what was said, what was done, what worked, what didn't work, and how they're going to adapt and move on and make those changes for the next time they're faced with those particular situations or tasks. So the types of mentorship that could potentially come around are informal or formal. So an informal mentorship system or process develops over time, and it's between, again, the mentor and the mentee. It involves the mentor and the mentee developing a trusting, supportive relationship that makes the mentee comfortable talking with the mentor. And again, this is a prime example of this would be in an informal situation where there's a coach and an athlete. That athlete is looking for mentorship from their coach, and it might not necessarily be so informal that it hasn't actually been explicitly stated, but the expectations aren't necessarily laid out. But when we take a step back and we look at this, there's definitely some mentorship happening between the two individuals. Now, if we look at a more formal mentorship, this is where there's a structured process in which the mentor is trained to perform his or her role or their role. And they're supported by an organization or team. So the best example here would be the provincial mentorship program that we actually have set up currently, and it's into its second year now. But basically around the province, we have a number of designated or assigned mentors, and they are working with one or two mentees from throughout the province. And it's not even necessarily sports specific. You might have a soccer coach with 20 years experience as a mentor, and they might be working with a relatively new hockey coach who's only 1 or 2 years into the practice. So they're not necessarily looking for skill on ice per se, but more around, it could be conflict resolution, it could be navigating the politics of sport. But the idea is that there's some skill sets that are either lacking or could be improved upon, and that's the focus of this formal mentorship relationship. So to kind of lay out the structure of what a formal mentorship process looks like, it comes with step one, planning a meeting. So two individuals come together, specific day, time, location, and they have an agenda that's laid out. So they meet, they discuss, and then from there, the mentor will then send the mentee off to do their thing, and there's some observation that generally takes place. So let's use an example of a practice. So the mentee would take what they've learned from the previous conversation or meeting discussion, they go and deliver. Meanwhile, the mentor is actually taking notes and observing. And then from there, step three is the two come back together and they have this reflective conversation. So in that original planning meeting, there's some, again, really great tools provided in the actual mentorship multi-sport module. So I recommend that if anyone's interested more in doing this, they register for the next time we offer it. But the checklist is looking at goals, actions, indicators of success, and new learning. So GAIN is the acronym there. And with that comes explicitly stating the goal of the task or the session, summarizing at the end the task or the session. So what are the outcomes? What are we hoping to address here? Clarify the roles of those involved in the task or session, list the actions of those involved within it, itemize the challenges and opportunities associated with implementing the task or session, and then identify what successful completion of the task or session would look like. So again, you're bringing these two individuals together. We're going to talk about what could be, but then the end, we're summarizing it, and then we're explicitly identifying what a successful delivery would look like. The next step of that is observation. So during the observation, the mentor gathers information on the actions of the mentee and the athlete. So this is where you might see that traditional coach standing there with a clipboard and pen taking notes. So they're writing their notes down, they're jotting down what they see. And the idea there is that the information gathered provides a complete description of the task or session. Because in the moment, they might be seeing something or feeling something or thinking something, and that's the stuff that needs to be written down so that they can come back and reflect on later. So the description should be non-judgmental and should not reflect the mentor's thoughts or feelings. So if you think about the mentor being in a high stress situation in terms of work, and they're meeting with their mentee that evening. And the idea is that you need to be able to check that baggage at the door, leave what happened at work, and you're solely focusing on what that particular mentee is doing, and you're not providing outside context to it. So free from judgment, and it should really be focused on what is actually happening in front of you. So some tips: observing from different locations. So if we're talking about, again, a sport-specific practice, it could be a practice, it could be a game, it could be a tournament. You might even want to look at the mentee or the coach in a brief debrief session after practice and just seeing how they're interacting excuse me, with their athletes, both in competition and out of competition. So you're providing different contexts. You want to be close enough to hear the coach and the athletes without getting in their way. The last thing you want is that person with a clipboard being the backseat driver or the backseat coach, because they are there to be a fly on the wall. The next is you want to be looking at the athletes' reactions to the coaches. If the coach or the mentee is not providing clear direction, and you're seeing some faces where the athletes are turning and they're having conversation to try to figure out what's going on, you want to be able to make sure and write that down and provide that information back to the coach whenever you come back to have the conversation. From there, you also want to be assessing the coach's instructions, and do they engage, do they bore, do they confuse athletes? So hopefully in this presentation tonight, I'm not boring anyone, and I'm trying to use a tone that can get people excited about mentorship. I know it can be difficult, but the idea is that you want to be able to see, and I don't have my camera turned on, I can't see your faces, but I would love to see, are you actually engaged? And that's what you're looking for as a mentee, or sorry, a mentor working with your mentee in an observational situation. And then having a form for recording observations. So again, maybe it's recording, maybe you're using your smartphone with their permission, obviously, or maybe it's paper and pen and you're just writing notes. So the list goes on. You're looking for items discussed in the planning meeting. You've identified what successful meeting is, so you're looking for those. And you're looking for things that they're doing well as what they could do better. And you're also writing down notes. How long does it take to deliver instruction? Are the athletes getting bored within those minutes or time where they're not moving? And then comparing what happened in the task or session to the plan for the meeting, plan the meeting. So going back to, this is what we said we were going to do, but in reality, this is what actually happened. So the last piece of this process is the reflective side of things. So the acronym here is FAST: feelings, analyze, synthesis, and transfer. So in this reflective conversation, the mentor tells the athletes what he or she saw during the observation and gives the mentee time to reflect on and respond to this information. It's one thing to come together and just me talk, but I want to have input from the mentee as well. And that is critical to this relationship. So this should help the mentees recognize what they learned and how to use those learnings to improve their next coaching task or session. They should be able to walk away with some tangible advice or instruction for how to improve their coaching practice. Now let's look at the mentoring functions and the skills. So when we start on the left here under functions, we have consultation, collaboration, and then we'll get into the skills, which is building rapport, listening, and paraphrasing. So these are essentially the tools that you're going to be using when you're meeting with your mentee. Consultation, giving advice or suggesting strategies, resources, and ideas, formally or informally, that may help mentees. So oftentimes the mentee, they're looking for advice, but they should be asking for it. This is not an opportunity where, next slide, once you start shoulding on people, they soon learn to should on themselves. I don't think I need to explain this too much, but if you're meeting with someone and all of a sudden you should have done this, you should have done that, doesn't let that person really get out what they want from it, and they walk away feeling pretty shitty, if you will. That was me trying to be funny. Collaboration. Mentor and mentee working together to plan or develop strategy. So they are working together, reducing the power imbalance that may exist between the mentor and mentee. We need to check that. We need to get through this I know more than you, and really think about this as an opportunity for the two of you to have a conversation and both of you grow at the same time. Giving mentors a chance to model the thought processes they use when planning and developing strategies. So there's some autonomy here. We really need to give them the opportunity to grow in this process. So mentors don't work to change mentees' minds. They direct mentees to change their state of mind. Any good coach out there is not there to change their athlete. They're there to provide them the skills and the tools for them to have self-recognition on areas that they need to improve upon. In order for that to happen, they need to build the rapport. So rapport refers to the close and harmonious relationships in which the people understand one another's feelings or ideas and communicate well. Communication plays a big part when building rapport. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. When you think back about your days as an athlete, and some of you are probably still there, but for many we've transitioned, we're now coaches. It's all about relationship building, and you need to be there, not necessarily just to talk about what happened on the ice or on the field or in the court, but what happened at school, what's happening with relationships. Maybe the reason why they're not having the most productive day, or they might have botched the game or lost that last whatever it is. Something deeper might be happening, and that's where that relationship building needs to come in first. Listening. So Stephen Covey's 5 levels of listening. 1, ignoring, where you do not even try to listen. I teach a lot of university students from all years, freshman all the way to senior. Not that I ignore them, but when I get a lot of these emails where it could be resolved if they just read the syllabus. I oftentimes, when I'm talking to them in person or nowadays responding in email, I might intentionally ignore that question and maybe direct them back to the syllabus. So that's just one way of, again, accepting, acknowledging that they're there, but you're not really addressing the underlying issue because it's really not that important. And that's often happening with level 1 ignoring. Pretending, where you pretend to listen even though you're not. Sometimes as a parent, I'm guilty of this. But when you're coaching, there's times when this is important and there's times where it's not. So when athletes are talking amongst each other, it doesn't really involve you, or maybe it does. There might be some pretending happening there, but really you're more concerned about their safety and you're focused on something else. Listening selectively. So listening to only what interests you. And again, we're all guilty of this. We do it all the time in our daily processes. And it can be beneficial because we only have limited brain space. So we really need to be selective on what is important, because if we engage in everything, you're not going to succeed as a coach. But again, bringing this back to the mentor-mentee relationship, selective listening is not ideal, especially when the mentee is spilling information that could be important. Attentive listening, so listening to understand the speaker and comparing his or her view with yours. So this is getting there. You are trying to understand what's happening and you're comparing it to maybe past experiences. Listening with empathy. So this is where things really start to happening. So you're listening to understand the speaker's words, intent, and feelings. And sure, they're talking about what might have just happened on the ice, or again, their feelings and emotions. But what you're really trying to understand is, why are they feeling that way? So you're listening with empathy. So some barriers to listening. So this is really important because there's many things that can interfere with you as a coach or mentor, or vice versa as a mentee. There could be some things happening. So environmental, it could be loud, it could be noisy, it could be cold, and you're so focused on what's happening with your own core temperature that you're distracted, you're not able to listen. Or things could be happening, again, in action. You could be on the bike or on the ice or in the water, so there's movement involved, and it can really cause some environmental distractions. Physiological, we really need to think about the timing of when we're trying to either ask a question or receive a response. So if you're working with an athlete and they just finished a high intensity bout of exercise, their heart rate might be up. They might be breathing heavy. They might be fatigued. So you're trying to give them instruction and they can't get past the fact that their head is about to go into the bucket because they're working really hard. Psychological, again, we mentioned about what's happening outside of sport. So they might have a really bad day. They might have got an F on a paper, or they might be overtrained, or just life in general. There's a lot going on there. So those are the three things to consider when you are trying to listen, but also you're also trying to provide information or advice. And there's a breakdown in the ability for the mentee to listen. Paraphrasing is a great tool to use. So what we're doing here is we're concisely restating the mentee's message. This focuses on the mentee's facts, ideas, or feelings, but uses the mentor's own words. So you're basically putting it back. You're validating the mentee by giving him or her the experience of being heard and acknowledged. Now, this process involves the mentor asking the mentee for feedback on the accuracy of his or her perceptions, because if you only just restate, but you don't actually pass the torch and allow them to provide the feedback based on what you've given them, there's going to be some breakdown in the paraphrasing process. And this is also a good tool to summarize large amounts of information from the mentee, just to check in and make sure you've got it right. So it's the rule of thirds. The mentee should talk for at least 2/3 of the time, and the mentor for at most 1/3 of the time. So again, you ask an open-ended question, they provide response, and then you would then paraphrase, and then you move on to the next topic. So the last part of this presentation is looking at what mentorship could look like. And what I did here is recognizing that coaches involved in these presentations come from all different sport backgrounds. So I pulled out 3 examples. So we're going to look at endurance sport, and I used triathlon as an example, artistic sport, so artistic swimming or synchronized swimming as it used to be known, and a power sport, so hockey. So starting with the endurance side. So when we break down a triathlon, you've got to swim, you've got to bike, you've got to run. And then there's the other stuff you need to consider as well. Strength and conditioning, mobility, flexibility. The main topic right now when we're getting into long-term development, used to be known as long-term athlete development, but now it's been rebranded and physical literacy plays a big part. We often talk about the importance of not specializing too soon, too early. Now, I know this is difficult as coaches because we want to capture those athletes and we want them to stick with our sport and we want them to get to that next level and become so passionate. But oftentimes we've got to think about the bigger picture. Triathlon is my background primarily as a former provincial coach. So when I was teaching triathlon, I looked at it in kind of two ways. I want them to be triathletes, but I also want them to be proficient swimmers, cyclists, and runners. And I also need them to have lateral strength. So they're so used to moving in one direction. Not very often do you see them getting into these lateral movements. So that's why we focus on speed skating as an opportunity to bring in or introduce a new sport in the off season, so winter, and it also gets them off of high impact running all the time. So this would be an example of how mentorship within a sport organization could reach out to other sport bodies, bring in coaches, swap out athletes, and provide a learning opportunity. It's also a great way to promote the sport. Now, if we look at an artistic sport mentorship, and again, I'm going to use artistic swimming as an example, they need to be able to swim. They need to have those skills. They need to be able to be confident and confident in the water and be strong when doing it. But they also need to be artistic. And arguably, they're not going to be getting that from doing laps in a pool, down and back, left, right, high elbow, all that good stuff. So we need to make sure that they're moving in a certain way and they look a certain way when they're doing it. At the same time, they also need to have the power. I don't know if any of you have ever actually done artistic swimming. I did it once with one of my classes that I teach, and I nearly drowned. I didn't have the proficient swim skills. I didn't have the strength, the core strength to be able to hold myself upside down and do the moves. What I tried to do artistic swimming, but it looked like it was just drowning with style, if you will. And power and strength, again, plays a big part of it. So who would have thought that an artistic swimmer should be learning how to do Olympic lifting as part of the Nova Scotia Weightlifting Association? So it just shows how you can bring different sport bodies together in a mentorship type role to be able to work with an athlete or work with various coaches and build on those deficiencies in a coach's area to be able to maintain or build on strength or power, speed, whatever it is. So I saved hockey for the end because I know there's a lot of people involved at this sport level or sport organization. And hockey, unfortunately, gets probably the worst rap for early specialization, especially in Nova Scotia, because you get the Sidney Crosby effect, you get the Nathan McKinnon. What we really need to be doing to progress those athletes to the next level, do they have unilateral strength, speed, agility, power, aerobic power, endurance, speed? They need to have so many well-rounded athletic abilities. And this is why I get excited about, sure, this is mentorship, but now I'm talking about developing athletic abilities, which is another module that I teach. So when we incorporate Nova Scotia Weightlifting Association, Soccer Nova Scotia, Bicycle Nova Scotia, all these different organizations, it's an opportunity to get that hockey player off the ice, moving in different directions, meeting new people, and getting mentorship from different coaches. Excuse me. So the whole idea around mentorship, sure, it's a mentor-mentee relationship, but really it's exposure. It's that mentee getting new skills, bringing their coaching abilities and understanding of their sport to a new level. Some of the best conversations that I've had as a coach and coach educator are during these modules. And it's because I'm not explicitly focusing on teaching about triathlon or teaching about cycling. I'm bringing in all these different coaches. We're talking about, what does your sport look like? What's the culture of your sport? What are some things that work? What are some things that don't work? And having these broad conversations and really creating a think tank. So every time I offer one of those modules, that alone becomes a mentorship opportunity. So that's the end of this presentation. I'll hand it back to Kirsty to see if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And I've seen this presentation and I've done the NCCP mentorship quite a few times, but I always pick up something new, and I've always loved how you wrap it up with like the multi-sport aspect. I think it's so great. And I know with Ringette, we do that. We've like partnered with speed skating. I've done some things with like floorball. So there's always people looking to work together and learn from each other. So definitely echo everything that was said. If there's any questions, please put them in the Q&A chat box, or you can use the raise hand function. And if there's no questions, this session was recorded and will be posted on YouTube. So I know it was a lot of information, and you can go back and rewatch it. Or like Jeff said, we do offer mentorship through our mentorship program. So you could definitely sign up for that program and get the training through there, or hopefully we'll offer it sometime virtually in the coming months. A couple questions came in. So someone asked, can you address the balance between mentoring for certification or a long-term coaching career?
Don't quite understand
Yeah.
the question.
Could you maybe rephrase that? Maybe you're asking about mentorship certification, like for NCCP. There is an NCCP course, and by completing it, you get 5 points.
And maybe I can explain that one. So when you're doing a comp dev, so competition development certification for your sport specific. So maybe you are a provincial level coach and you need to have your comp dev certification to be able to coach at Canada Games. I'm just kind of making up an example here. Oftentimes there's a number of modules you need to complete. So nutrition, sports psychology, developing athletic abilities, preparing a practice, and mentorship. And the idea of mentorship being snuck in there, and this is one of the newest modules in the multi-sport comp dev level. The idea is to really get coaches thinking about relationship building. What type of conversations are you having with your athletes, your parents, all that type of stuff. So it really is giving you that skill set to be a more effective communicator as well. So I think that's kind of like the certification side. But in terms of pure interest, there's a lot you can take from this module for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And, I've just received a couple questions about like where their sport would fall into that. But really, guys, I'll kind of answer this one is like, I would welcome you to be creative with that. Like, luckily through my job, I get to connect with coaches from all sports. And I actually connected with a wrestling coach, and they were going to like swap practices with us. So like they were going to come on and play ringette for practice, and we were going to go try wrestling. Unfortunately, that stopped because of COVID, but that like wrestling and ringette, you never would have considered them being the same, but you can definitely learn from other sports. So I would challenge you to like be creative and go out there and ask other coaches to collaborate.
And even just learning the rules of a different sport. There's a lot that comes from with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. Okay. So if there's no more, do we have another one? Okay. They just said thank you. Okay. And Maura, your hand just came up, so I'll allow you to talk. I'm assuming you have a question. Or was that an accident?
Camera shy.
Okay.
There's a lot of people on here. I don't blame you.
Okay, we'll move on. So thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for attending the second session. We'll pause recording and then we'll start our third one. So thanks, Jeff.
Great, thanks so much.
Okay, so thank you everyone for attending the first annual National Coaches Week Atlantic Virtual Coach Conference. This will be our last presentation for the conference, and it's on a really important topic that we always have coaches suggesting, so mental performance and coping with stress. So I'll introduce our presenter. So Megan Ferguson is one of only 10 Canadian Sports Psychology Association mental performance consultants in Atlantic Canada. Megan has worked with teams, athletes, coaches, and professionals in a variety of performance fields and competition levels. Achieving her Master's of Human Kinetics and Applied Sports Psychology at the University of Ottawa, Megan is also certified in mental health first aid, mindfulness, facilitation for athletic performance, and several NCCP courses. Her extensive education in sport intervention and consultation, paired with her strong background in team sport, is an asset to many competitive organizations in building cohesive groups that are mentally prepared, adaptable, and resilient. She currently resides on PEI, where she owns and operates Mind Matters Mental Performance Training. So Megan, I'll pass it over to you. So I'll stop sharing my screen and you can share from here. Looking forward to learning about this topic.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kirsty. I'm just gonna see if this works. Share screen. I'm assuming you guys can all see that right now.
Yeah, looks good. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Just want to double check. So thank you guys. Thank you, Kirsty, for the introduction, and thank you guys for tuning in tonight. I know I've learned a lot, not just from this evening, but from tuning in all week. So really excited to not only apply what I've learned this evening and this week to my coaching, but my consulting as well. So thank you very much for organizing this. And thanks for inviting me to speak. So tonight's topic, I'll be talking about mental performance, specifically how to use mental performance to cope with different stressors, either we face as athletes or coaches or professionals. So I'll just give you another little quick brief of my background. So as Kirsty said, my name is Megan Ferguson. I'm currently on Prince Edward Island, where I own and operate my business Mind Matters, which is one of 10 professional consulting agencies here in Atlantic Canada. I'm a member of the Canadian Association as well as the American Applied Sports Psychology Association. Been back here since late 2017. So since then I've been working with different teams and organizations, not just within Atlantic Canada, but still in Ontario as well via virtual, before COVID or after COVID, we're still doing the virtual training, which is nice. Growing up, I was a multi-sport athlete. So if there was a team sport in the area, I was likely playing it. Big concentration in hockey and soccer mostly, but as I got a little older, went into rugby and female tackle football as well. I also started coaching at a very young age. So when I was in high school, I was already starting to help out being an assistant coach and a trainer with different teams. So I have been coaching for a while. Most recently, my most notable things have been with Holland College women's hockey. I was an assistant coach back in 2015, as well as jumped back on board here in 2019 and 2020. I've also just recently been appointed the head coach of the under-16 female flag football team, which we're excited to hopefully hit the ground running there in the spring. All systems go. My education, so as she mentioned, I do have a Master's of Human Kinetics and Applied Sports Psychology from University of Ottawa, preceding my Bachelor's of Rec and Sports Studies and my Diploma of Sport and Leisure Management. Do have a couple certifications pertaining to mental health and performance, obviously there. When I'm not consulting or when I'm not coaching, I'm still actively involved in sporting communities here across the island and in the Maritimes. Just been recently appointed the Vice President of Football PEI, as well as co-founded the first female tackle football team here on PEI. We're hopefully going to go through a rebranding here soon, so I'll touch on that a little later. But the most common question that I tend to get, whether it's in passing or when I'm doing these things, is why Mind Matters? Why did you choose the name Mind Matters? Why did you get into the field to begin with? What sparked your interest with sport and exercise psychology? And in a nutshell, when I was in post-secondary education, I was a goaltender for the varsity soccer team, and I knew mentality was important. My whole life I knew that mentality played a huge role in sport, but I didn't quite know how to harvest that or how to apply different things. So I was really fortunate that when I was taking these post-secondary education courses, we had an intro to sport and exercise psychology. And very fortunate enough that the one teaching that was a sports psychologist. So I started applying what I was learning in my classroom to my gameplay. And not only did I notice a huge increase in my performance, but my satisfaction in that performance and my work ethic in school and the way I was dealing with relationships and friends and family. So in a nutshell, I was learning not only how to apply these things to my sport, but in day-to-day life and seeing these noticeable differences. As I dove a little deeper into this education, working with teams, working with athletes and professionals, they kind of came back with the same thing, saying these skills that you're teaching me to use in hockey or in soccer and rugby, I'm seeing a huge difference in my academic performance or in my, physical training or in my rest and rehabilitation practices. So in a nutshell, Mind Matters is so important because these skills are life transferable. They're not just fundamental learning skills, they're fundamental life skills. And I bold those fun and mental words in there because my goal with Mind Matters is to do hands-on, experiential, fun mental training. So without listing all those skills that are there, you can read those. There's different skills that we can train the mind and body for, both in sport and in life, both as an athlete or as a coach. But just like physical training, or just like when we're learning something new, mental training requires the individual to actually dedicate their practice and their willingness to get outside of their comfort zone. And the best way that I can actually describe this is by actually sharing my video for a second and walking you guys through a little exercise. Hopefully this works. So I'm not sure if you can see my camera at all, Kirsty.
Yep, I can see.
Okay, perfect. So I know I can't see you guys, which is kind of different for a change, but you guys can follow along with me. I'm sure you're watching. So kind of to explain this, getting outside of the comfort zone thing, this is my icebreaker I usually do. But what we're going to start with is having our arms at our sides. And without even thinking about it, I want you guys to comfortably cross your arms. So do whatever comes natural to you. Don't think about it. Just comfortably cross your arms. Notice how that feels. It should feel pretty easy, pretty effortless. And take a look at what you're seeing when you look down at your arms. So notice what that comfort level looks like. So for me, my comfort level is my left arm over my right arm with my right fingers touching my left bicep. So for me, this is without even thinking. I could stay like this all day. Next, what you're going to do is you're going to shake out your arms at your sides. And now I want you to cross your arms the opposite way that you just did. And it might take a second. That's okay. Don't rush it. Just make sure that you're crossing them the opposite way that you did the first time. So hopefully we all have that crossed by now, but I want you to again look down at your arms and notice what you see. It should look differently than the first time, and without a doubt it probably feels a little different than the first time as well. So one more time, shake out those arms. Cross those arms the exact same way that you just did. That opposite way. And again, sit with that feeling. One more time, shaking out the arms. And one last time, that opposite way. I'll let you sit with that for a second when I go back to going back to my screen here. And back to a share screen. I think that should work. So you can cross your arms and uncross them, it all works. But basically what I'm getting at this is mental training obviously isn't just crossing and uncrossing your arms and going through that motion. But the idea is there that we know what comfort is. We could stay in comfort all day if we wanted to. But when we start to push ourselves outside of that comfort zone, not only does it start to get a little easier and a little quicker, but it starts to become more comfortable. And that's in its essence what mental training is. It's pushing yourself outside of that comfort zone, knowing that you're going to be uncomfortable, but knowing that the more you do it, the easier it's going to get and the less you actually have to think about it. So for tonight's session, I am going to talk a little bit about mental performance training, specifically for coaching and coaches related. I'm going to introduce some controllables and the acronym of the ABCs, which we will touch on in a little bit. I'm going to obviously talk about stress and the different degrees, signs, and responses and symptoms that we can go through as coaches. And then finally, combining those two together and using mental performance training strategies to combat that stress and to how to cope with those situations. So we're going to learn how to apply those ABCs. There is a little thing down in the left-hand corner there, it's a little clipboard with a light bulb, and you can see the words reflect, record, and revisit. Typically, I like to run workshops, hands-on, getting some different discussions and, learning as we go. I know that we're limited here for time, so I'm just kind of encouraging you guys to write things down. Pen and paper would definitely be preferred. The research shows that we are more likely to retain and revisit these things if we write them down pen to paper. So that's just a little note if you want to participate in a little different way, feel free. So mental performance training, there's a lot of key words lately that are thrown around like mentally tough and mentally prepared and positive mindset. And a lot of the times people are hearing these words and phrases and they know that it's important and they know that it's something they should do, but they don't exactly know what it is or how to achieve those things. So my job as a mental performance consultant is to help facilitate this learning and development of these skills so you can achieve these different states. So in a nutshell, it's the development of these cognitive techniques, practices, and attitudes to performance-specific contexts. So that could be career, could be business, sport, military and first responders, but applying those things to performance-specific contexts with the aim of not only enhancing performance, but also enhancing positive personal well-being. How we do this, there's different ways we can do this as mental performance consultants. There's workshops, there's one-on-one training, but a lot of what I do is help teams and athletes identify different situations that they could go through, and not only identifying those, but preparing and practicing how we're going to optimally feel, think, and act when those situations take place. And the best way that I can describe this is by comparing this analogy to a fire drill. And I'm sure a lot of us have gone through fire drills at one point in our life. I'm not sure if they've changed much since I've been in school or others have been in school, but the premise is there that we go through fire drills and we always remember key things about those fire drills as kids. Remain calm, single file, don't take anything with you, here's your exit strategy, here's where you meet. And we go through these fire drills multiple times throughout the year because we want to condition ourselves not only where to go and how to act, but also how to feel in those situations. Our teacher's always saying, remain calm, don't panic. So we're conditioning ourselves not only how to react, but how to think and feel in those situations too. And that's a lot of what mental training is preparing for those situations on how you optimally want to feel, act, and think in those situations. Now, a lot of this comes with training, but there's two key things that you can keep in mind if you're wanting to build that mental toughness. The first one is self-awareness. Len talked a little earlier about your why and knowing yourself and knowing your athletes. And a good thing to do is really just start to look in the mirror and really find out what makes you tick, what motivates you, how do you react in certain situations. Len's great question earlier about, what gets you out of bed in the morning. So having that self-awareness to know how you react in situations, but how you also react in day-to-day life is super helpful. So self-awareness is one, but probably the most important thing is identifying what is actually in your control. We have all these things that go through our life that we think are important and that we know we have to, pay attention to. But when you're breaking it down, the best thing to focus on are the things that matter and the things that you can control. And we're going to touch on that here in a moment. So mental performance specifically for coaches, there are workshops and one-on-one training, but the reoccurring themes that myself has been dealing with other coaches is leadership development and effective communication. So not necessarily just with how to lead and effectively communicate with your team and your players, but also your co-coaches and your staff, maybe your athletics department, maybe your trainers or personal trainers. Most often you're wanting to learn how to communicate effectively with parents too if you're coaching minor athletes. Goal setting and process planning, it's a big important thing to set goals, obviously, and, knowing why you're working towards something, but also enjoying the process along with it. So not just setting goals for your team and their performances, but also personal goals, coaching goals that you might have for yourself. Training specific goals, whether that's off-ice training, so dry land training, maybe you're working on rest and recovery for your athletes, maybe you're working on rest and recovery for yourself, but training specific goals and the process with that. And finally, the big ticket moments is what I like to call them. So, preparing how you're going to deal with upcoming tryouts, preparing how you're going to deal with making those cuts, leading into playoffs or a rivalry game, the big championships games. How are you setting goals and processing how you're going to think, feel, and react in those situations? And finally, I've mentioned this before, but self-awareness and also self-regulation. So knowing what, again, makes you tick, makes you frustrated, makes you succeed, but also how to regulate that yourself in those moments. And a lot of that comes with reflective practice. So that can be journaling, it can be film analysis, it can be discussions with your co-coaches, but reflecting on your practice as much as possible can really bring about this mental training. As we mentioned before, probably the three most important things that you could take away from tonight are identifying the things that are actually in your control. And I have a really good acronym to remember how you can actually focus on the controllables. And it's as simple as focusing on your ABCs. So A being for your attention. So how is your concentration? Where is your focus directed? Is it on things that are actually within your control? Is your focus impairing your performance or improving your performance in any way? B is for breathing. So I like to call that our human superpower that we have available to us 24/7. So again, how can your breath actually help you control situations or control yourself a little better? And finally, C for communication. So not just overt communication with how we're talking to our athletes or our staff, but how we're speaking to ourselves. So how do our thoughts actually impact not only our stress, but our performance? So what is stress? You know, stress is without a doubt one of life's long-standing rivals. It's not just evident in sport, but it's in our day-to-day lives and vice versa. And most often than not, if we're experiencing stress in our day-to-day lives, and we are an athlete or we are a coach, there are times where it can carry over into that performance. So it's important to not only identify what stress is, but what stress is to you. And most often, stress is a perceived imbalance between the demands of a situation and your actual capabilities to meet these demands. So again, a perceived imbalance, meaning it can be real or imagined. So situational demands, if we're thinking of a situational demand, let's say an athlete going for a tryout, they're knowing that this is very important to them. It's a situational demand. As a coach, you know, it's also a situational demand as far as making a good first impression with your athletes, you know, perhaps making cuts later down the line. So your ability to meet those demands could be lesser or more based on that situation. So if we're looking at an athlete, you know, they could have undertrained before tryouts. They might not have had a lot of sleep. They might not have ate very well before the tryouts. So they see that imbalance because their situational demand is a little heavier than their capacity to meet them. As far as a coach, you know, it could be the same reasons. Perhaps they feel underprepared going into tryouts. Perhaps they're nervous for different reasons. But there is an imbalance there that they're perceiving, which can lead you to feel threatened or distraught in many ways, which is that fight or flight response that we will touch on in a few minutes. Again, it can be real or imagined. It doesn't quite matter. The body is still going to react the same way. It's much like visualization. When we're training for mental training, we ask the athletes to imagine the situation as clearly and accurately as we can, because if we're conditioning our brains to go through that in visualization, when the moment comes, it's like we've already trained it. So the same thing with stress. We can imagine stress, or it can be actually tactilely there, but the body is still going to react that same way. And most importantly, it's an individual experience, right? So meaning what causes you stress may not affect someone else in that same way. And a lot of that comes down to knowing when you're reaching your maximum level of stress. Again, everybody can be different, but noting when your stress is actually shifting. This can also be, you know, based on how important that situation is to you, that can actually affect your level of stress as well, and can impact your performance based on, you know, the situation that you're in. So what I encourage you guys to do is acknowledge what you know about your personal stress limits. You know, do you know when you're approaching your maximum stress limit? How often are you reaching these limits? And are you able to control that stress in that moment, or is that stress actually controlling you? So I encourage you to just write down a couple notes on this and note your personal levels of stress. We're going to touch on a couple things here in a moment as well. So good stress versus the bad stress. As we mentioned, you know, earlier, it's a perceived notion. So it could be real or imagined, but it's still going to trigger that physiological fight or flight response. And this response is meant to protect you in situations and, you know, lead to being more alert and focused in those situations. But what we don't understand is that stress can also be perceived as a choice. So the world's best tend to see stressful situations more as an opportunity to succeed rather than a threat. So good stress can help you rise to a challenge by leading you to exert more effort, stretch your abilities, maintain your focus and concentration, and actually persevere in those moments of toughness. On the other side of that, bad stress can start to be, you know, impairing your performance and well-being, and can show up in a number of different ways. You know, can disturb sleeping and eating patterns, can impact your motivation and commitment to different things, can come in a more physiological sense, so muscle tension, aches and pains, and also thought processes, so like indecision, self-doubt, lack of confidence. It's also important to know that the little stressors, when they're added up, can actually turn into long-term stress, which can actually rewire the brain in many ways, you know, making you more vulnerable to things like heart attacks and strokes, anxiety, and, you know, different mental illnesses. I say this because it's also good to identify when these little stressors are adding up to become big stressors and reaching out when you do need help. So I want you to take a moment again to just write down a couple things and think of or list some different examples you've experienced as a coach where you've experienced either good stress or bad stress. And in the essence of time, I am going to move on, but I'm sure this is recorded, so I'm sure we can revisit this if we need to. So the causes of stress. It can be a number of things that can trigger us with stress, and they're labeled as stressors, but stressors can be both internal and external. Internal meaning they are within us, so it could be our thoughts, our behaviors on certain situations. So I gave some examples there, having low self-confidence or self-esteem, fearing the unknown, perhaps unrealistic expectations, negative self-talk and pessimism, low assertiveness. All of these things are within us, so these are considered internal stressors. The opposite of that would be external stressors, so completely outside of us. So other people, for instance, family members, friends, athletes, teammates, referees, coaches, bosses, other people in general. We really have no control over those people at all, but they can still inflict stress on us in our day-to-day lives and in coaching. Fans and media, deadlines, making cuts, traffic, weather, field conditions, equipment malfunctions, all of these things that definitely add to the stress in our life. But at the end of the day, we have no control of those things. So when we're looking at what causes stress, a big part of mental performance training and learning how to deal with stress is identifying what causes you stress and whether or not these things are actually in your control. So taking a moment, either by looking at these examples or thinking on your own experiences, think about some common stressors that you encounter when you're coaching. And when you're writing these down, identify whether or not these are internal stressors. So are they something that you actually have some control over, or external, something that you have no control over whatsoever, but are still inflicting some stress on your coaching. So symptoms of stress, or responses, as we can say. So to effectively manage and ease stress, especially if you've reached your personal limit, like we talked about earlier with that max limit of stress, it's so important to recognize and acknowledge how this stress affects you. And it can come out in a bunch of different ways, but we're going to focus on the main ways here. Psychological responses, meaning your thought patterns, your cognitions, your emotions. I've listed some most common responses here psychologically. So we have memory problems, constant worrying, indecision, self-doubt. Those are all, cognitions of how we think. And it can also come out in emotions. So are you irritable? Do you have a sense of isolation? Do you feel overwhelmed easily? Do you still have fear and apprehension? When you're feeling these things and when you're, responding in this way, these are all psychological responses. So at the end of the day, we do have a little bit control over this when we have the proper training and when we dedicate our practice to actually finding out ways to deal with this. Physical responses, obviously, so the common ones like muscle tension, aches and pains, clammy hands, frequent colds, the jitters or shakes. So those are all physical responses to stress. And finally, the behavioral ones. So again, these are ones that, might need some more attention, but eating more or less, your sleeping habits, how you're dealing with that. Perhaps you're using drugs, alcohol to relax in those situations, overtraining and decreased physical activity. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of stress is taken out in overtraining. So when we see athletes constantly at the gym or overtraining, we have to know how often they're doing it. And is it actually impairing their performance, or are they trying to deal with their stress by overtraining? So it's always important as coaches to note not only how we're dealing with stress and what our responses are, but the different responses that we might note in our athletes and know how to address those situations. So this is why I invite you guys to note some of the symptoms that you've perhaps experienced as a coach, and note whether or not these responses impacted not only your performance, but the performance of your athletes. We're talking about psychological responses up there. So moodiness, short-tempered. And if we think about how that's affecting our performance, imagine how that's impacting our athletes and our team. Physical responses as well with their body language. Usually if an athlete You don't need to have to say anything to know that you're stressed out. An athlete can tell that based on how you're standing or, your nonverbal body language. So it's always good to tap into not only what we're feeling, but how we might be expressing that stress to others. So one of my favorite quotes, I try to use it wherever I go. So this was, it fit perfectly into this presentation tonight, but favorite one is energy flows where attention goes. And that can be talked about with mental training, but also with stress management. So regardless of how you perceive that stress, it's going to cost you energy as it challenges you. So it's therefore important to prioritize those levels of stress and invest time and energy into addressing those that are most important to you and those that you can control. And again, these are the internals, the important internals. So when we're looking back at those stressors that we listed earlier, or if you can identify some now, it's always very helpful to prioritize those stressors. And again, making note of if they are in your control or not. With regards to those stressors that are important, but not necessarily in your control, this is, we're talking about those externals, it's always good to focus on your responses to them. So this is why I'm saying apply these ABCs. These are the things that you can manage. Because at the end of the day, trying to control those uncontrollables actually increases your stress. So again, level of control is important, but also prioritizing those stressors. So when we're reviewing those, take a look at the ones you've written down or the ones you have in mind, and see if you can prioritize them based on their importance, but also their level of control. So at the end of the day, how can we use mental performance training and different strategies and techniques to actually combat stress? How can we use what we've learned to deal with stress in our daily life and in coaching? I'm reminding you again of the ABCs because this is really the bread and butter of what we're going to focus on. But your attention, your concentration, your focus is directly within your control. It might take some practice and some fine tuning, but with practice, you can dedicate some time to figuring out what you can and can't focus on. It goes back to that perception. Is your stress real or is it imagined? And are you choosing to see this as an opportunity to rise or a threat? Finding a way to look at that challenge in a different light can actually help you. Again, that controllability, so internal or external. Are these things within my control? Are these my thoughts? Are these my feelings? Are these my actions? Or is this stress brought on by someone else, by something that I have completely no control over? So the identification process is huge in that. B for breathing. I called it earlier our human superpower, but the breath is something that we have on us 24/7 that we really should utilize to help us deal with different situations and regulate not only our thoughts, but our physiological responses as well. So the mechanics and tempo of the breath is super important. Most people have heard the in through the nose, out through the mouth for those mechanics. But a lot of people also don't realize that the tempo of your breath is super important. So breathing very rapidly or holding your breath is counterproductive to trying to calm down in that moment. But it can be very useful if you're looking to activate yourself. If you're feeling sluggish before a game, if you're stressed out for whatever which reason and you need to get your mind off that, activating your body and breathing at a higher level can actually clear that mechanism, as opposed to the relaxation, which is also in through the nose, out through the mouth for a longer period for that exhale. But it can help you clear the mechanism and concentrate a little straighter and think things through a little clearer. I have an image that's actually moving here now, and this is the 5 and 5 breathing technique. And I love to use this with my athletes because they tell me even without even noticing it, they're just watching it and they feel calm. But the analogy here is you're breathing on the expansion, you're breathing in on the expansion and exhaling when it's going back down. But if you're breathing in tune with this, the in for 5, out for 5, you'll notice that you're actually going to find that homeostasis in your breathing, and you might actually calm down just by counting and breathing with this figure. And finally, communication. So I talked about this earlier, but not just how you're communicating with your teammates or your athletes or your co-coaches, but how you're communicating with yourself. So are you thinking productive, corrective self-talk? I don't like to use the word positive self-talk because a lot of the times that's not the case. I like to use productive self-talk. I give the example here, it's Nike's great slogan of just do it. But if you look at that, the words before that actually say, just don't quit. And if we're thinking to ourselves, either as athletes or as coaches, whatever that may be, just don't quit, our mind automatically hears the word quit. So without thinking about it, our body starts to shut down. It starts to go into that quit mode. We may not be wanting to quit, but by using that word, our body recognizes that word, starts to go into quit mode. So a corrective way to correct this and make it more productive is just do it, or just keep going, right? So there's different ways to correct our self-talk that'll actually be productive for our own thoughts. Finally, our nonverbals. So again, could be affecting ourselves. So if we're holding that tension in our body, that's a way our body is communicating to our mind that something is wrong. So learning how to release that tension in our muscles, your body language, your stance, can also affect your athletes. Thinking about hockey coaches, I work with a lot of hockey teams, and, if there's something that doesn't quite go well, the coach may be eliciting that negative body language without even saying any words. But that is going to be noticeable to your athletes, and it can be contagious. So I encourage you guys to look at these controllables and think about how you can apply these ABCs to cope with the stressors that you may have listed earlier. So again, our A for attention. Are we seeing this as a choice? Is this a level of control? Your breathing, how can we use that breath to deal and regulate our emotions and our physiological responses to stress in the moment? And also communication. So noting how we're speaking to ourselves, but also how we're feeling, how we're standing, what our facial expressions are, and how that can be counterproductive to our athletes as well. So just a few reminders to wrap up. I think I'm close to time here. But number one, so identify the stressors in your life. So remember that these chronic little stressors can actually turn into being big, larger stressors with time. So it's important to identify and prioritize these stressors that you feel are most important and controllable. The next one is recognize how stress affects you personally. Again, it may not affect you the same way it affects someone else, but if you're aware of the psychological, the physiological, and behavioral symptoms that you tend to experience when you're facing pressure situations, simply writing them down and identifying them is a good first step. Number three, accepting that stress is inevitable. Like we said, we deal with it in performance, in day-to-day life. It's not necessarily ever going to go away, but it's how we deal with those situations. So it's important to take note of when your responses personally are becoming unmanageable and are draining your performance and well-being. So noting when it's starting to peak to that maximum level and we're seeing different dips in different areas. Number four, remind yourself that you're always going to have a choice on how you perceive those stressful situations, and choose to perceive them in a positive way in order to tackle them as challenges and learning opportunities rather than seeing them as threats and opportunities to fail. Number five, developing and implementing coping techniques that complement those ABCs we talked about earlier. It can be in the form of meditation, mindfulness, relaxation techniques, mental rehearsal and visualization, goal setting, positive, productive self-talk, whatever way, shape, or form that may be. There's different mental skills to attack those coping techniques, but keeping in mind those ABCs, that could be something helpful for you moving forward. And finally, probably the most important, but knowing your own personal stress limits is very important, but sometimes you can't deal with that all by yourself. So it's always important to know the resources you have and get help with when you need it. So whether that's with, your spouse, your parents, your friends, but reaching out when you feel that you are overwhelmed, it goes a long way. A couple references and works cited there, but I'll leave you with a quote. It's one of my favorites too, is do what you can with what you have where you are. And again, when we were talking about controllables, feeling how you can deal with those stresses in that moment, using your controllables, using those ABCs. So I invite you to, reach out with some questions here tonight, or shoot me an email or reach me on Facebook. I'd be happy to speak with you guys further. And thank you very much, Kirsty. I don't know if I go back to sharing my screen a different way or...
Whatever you want, or you can just put your video on, whatever you're comfortable with. Yeah.
No, you can still see my screen or not?
Yeah. It's starting to go away. But thank you so much, Megan. That's such a great topic and so much valuable information that came out of that. So thank you very much. And we've already have questions coming in, so great. I'll get right to them. The first one was, I'll put two of these together. So they're curious of if the bulk of your clients are involved in individual sports or in team sports, and then also do you do virtual sessions with teams?
Yeah, so thanks. So I'm working with individuals and teams. I do work with a lot of teams in particular, just because that tends to be my background. PEI especially, you know, people know that I've been brought up here with team sports with coaching and stuff, but, you know, working a lot with hockey, with soccer. A lot of my clients right now are actually with tackle football all over Canada right now. I work with some tennis players as well with individual sports. So, you know, I do work with individuals and teams.
Okay, great. And a couple more questions. So what are your tips for managing stress before a big game?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as I said, like everybody can deal with stress in a different way. So, you know, generally answering that question might not be helpful. But as I said, if you're really finding those big games are difficult, I advise you to maybe, you know, think it through the night before. So visualizing yourself being successful, seeing different things you want to complete in the game, as far as your movements, as far as your thoughts, and running through the game the night before and seeing success actually prepares the brain to react the best way possible in that moment. So visualization is huge, and those ABCs, keep those in mind, you know, your focus, your breathing, and your communication.
Awesome, thank you. And one more. So would you suggest introducing controlled or imagined stressors to your athletes to practice proper coping techniques?
Yeah, that is a huge thing that actually I started doing here about a couple of years ago, especially with the basketball and football teams I work with, is introducing those pressure cooker situations, is like I like to call them. So, you know, football especially, you know, if we're picturing ourselves, you know, 4th and inches, or if it's a kick for the last few points of the game, practicing those situations in practicing and training. So again, your brain knows that you can go through this and succeed rather than going through it for the first time in a game. So I encourage coaches to actually introduce those different stressor moments within your training for sure.
Great. And going back to one of those other questions, do you do virtual videos with teams, like virtual sessions?
Yeah, and it's funny because I was doing that before COVID, but with COVID, it kind of accelerated that a bit more. So yes, happy to do virtual sessions, definitely.
Okay, great. And I will be following up this conference with a big email with all the resources and emails. So you can always reach out to Megan if you do want to connect. I think that's everything. If anyone has any questions, definitely put it in the Q&A. But before we close out the conference, first of all, thank you, Megan. That was awesome. Such a great topic. And sorry, there's some chats coming in. Okay. And yeah, so we really appreciate it. So thank you. And I'm just going to share my screen. So I just wanted to go through a few things before we end this conference. So hopefully you can see that. So again, guys, the VIP coach program, I would really love for Nova Scotia coaches to apply for this program. It's completely free. We want to recognize coaches. That's what National Coaches Week is all about. So please apply for this program. It's free. Go to supportforsport.ca/VIP, and it takes a couple minutes to apply, and then you can hopefully work towards becoming a VIP coach and receive lots of perks. Again, thank you to everyone that helped make this conference possible. Although we weren't able to travel around the province and meet coaches and offer in-person PD, we definitely reached a lot more Nova Scotian and Atlantic and Canadian coaches. So thank you for joining us this week, and thank you to all the presenters for taking time out of their evenings to inform us of such important topics. Again, I want to highlight the new Black and Indigenous Coach Mentorship Program. So this is available to Nova Scotian coaches who identify as Black or Indigenous or both. And you'll receive one-on-one guidance from someone, so kind of like a mentor like Jeff was talking about. You'll get NCCP training, you'll have access to workshops, and it's a 2-year program, sorry. And it's constant engagement, great professional development, and completely free. So definitely apply or pass this information on to anyone that you may know. And our social media contests close on Sunday, so the last day of National Coaches Week. Please go online, use the hashtag #ThanksCoach, and thank any coach that was your coach or is currently your coach or one of your fellow coaches. Encourage your athletes to take part in this. You'll be entered into a draw when you use the hashtag and tag us, CSC Atlantic. You'll be entered in a draw for $50 to Cleves for whoever submitted it, and then $50 for the coach that you recognized. And again, NCCP training, there's a lot of free training right now, including this nutrition course for Nova Scotia coaches and anyone attending the conference. So just use this code and you'll be able to access this course for free. And usually it's $20. So just make sure that you put the code or use the code before September 27th, and then you can do the training whenever you want, but it's important that you use the code before then. And again, I would love if you apply for the VIP program. So I'll just go back to that slide. So supportforsport.ca/VIP. We're really trying to get 500 coaches into the program by the end of the week to show how much we appreciate coaches and how much they volunteer in our communities in Nova Scotia. So thank you so much, guys. Really enjoyed this. I learned a lot myself, and I hope you did too. And we'll see you for some future virtual events in the upcoming months. And next month is Safe Sport Month for Nova Scotia, so there will be a lot more PD opportunities around safe sport as well. So thank you so much, and feel free to reach out to me at kirsty@cscatlantic.ca with any questions. And again, I'll be following up with this conference with some more information. So thank you.